Hello, everybody. Peace and power, elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in the faith. So today I am going on to the subject about science, spirituality, and philosophy. So the question becomes: did science come out of school of spirituality, philosophy, or both? And that's the reason why I'm asking these questions. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through and go back to looking at the definition of what is science, what is spirituality, and what is philosophy, right? But before I go there, I just want to thank everybody that's been liking my channel, sharing my channel, subscribing to my channel, etc. Okay. So I kind of stayed up all night trying to figure out what sources I'm going to use. So it's a lot of sources that I have, both physical copy and the ebooks as well. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna walk through it step by step. All right. Now, what I'm going to do first is get into the definition of all with science, spirituality, and philosophy. Okay. And then I'm gonna go back and start using the sources. All right. And then also I'm supposed to be having somebody come on here. So maybe I'll bring this person on here probably like maybe 15, 20 minutes. But until then, let's just go ahead and let's go back and let's define what philosophy is first. Well, let's define science. All right, so according to the information, right? Because we gotta walk through this. What is science? So science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in form of testable explanation and prediction about the universe. Correct? Then we go further down, right? Where it talks about the etymology. So the word science has been used in Middle English since the 14th century. Okay. It says in the sense of state of knowing. The word was borrowed from the Anglo-Norman language as a suffix "sanis," which was borrowed from the Latin word "scientia," meaning knowledge, awareness, understanding. Okay. So now it goes down here to proto-science. Now this is very important. We got to get into the proto-science. So what is the proto-science? So it says proto-science has existed since ancient history. This is shown by the construction of complex calendars, techniques for making poisonous plants edible, and public works on a national scale. Okay. So let's go into what proto-science is. So proto-science, its simplest meaning, involves the earliest era of history of science, right? So when the scientific method was still nascent, the term can also be applied to modern emerging fields of science study. So it goes in to talk about pre-scientific proto-science, right? So the term pre-scientific means at the roots relating to an era before science existed. For example, traditional medicine existed for thousands of years before medical medicine did. And thus many aspects of it can be described as pre-scientific. In a related sense, proto-science topics such as the alchemy of Newton's day can be called pre-scientific, in which case the proto-science and pre-labels can function more or less synonymously. Right? So now when we get into the history of science, the history of science covers the development of science from ancient times to the present. It compasses all three branches: natural, social, and formal science. All right, so we're going to get into all the ancient time period later, but I just want to get to that. So again, let's do a recap. Let's do a recap on what science is. So science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in form of testable explanation and prediction about the universe. Okay. Now, let's get into what spirituality is. So, what is the meaning of spirituality? So, the meaning of spirituality has developed and expanded over time, and various meanings can be found alongside each other. Traditionally, spirituality refers to a religious process of reformation which aims to recover the original shape of man, oriented at the image of God, as exemplified by the founders and sacred texts of the religions of the world. The term was used within early Christianity to refer a life oriented towards the Holy Spirit. But we look at the etymology, it said the term spirit means animating or vital principle in man and animals. It derived from the Old French "spirit," which comes from the Latin word spiritus, means soul, ghost, courage, vulgar, and breathe. It's related to spirare, means yell, means breath. And to Vulgate, the Latin word spiritus is used to translate the Greek pneuma and Hebrew ranch. So the term spiritual matters concerning the spirit is derived from Old French spiritual, which is derived from the Latin spiritualis, which comes from the word spiritus or spirit. Now, and it goes down to say there's no single widely agreed upon definition of spirituality. Survey of the definition of the term as used in scholarly research show a broad range of definition with limited overlap. A survey of review by McCarroll, each dealing with the topic of spirituality, gave 27 explicit definitions, among which there was little agreement. So this impairs the systematic study of spirituality and the capacity to communicate findings meaningfully. All right. So, but we all understand spirituality as belief system, right? Or a connection with the spirit, or understanding from the concept of dealing with gods and deities, right? Dealing with sometimes a lot of times spirituality is associated with religion, correct? Now let's go into what is philosophy, because let's go into philosophy. What is, if I can pull it up? All right, here we go. All right, so philosophy. Philosophy deals with what, according to the Greek terminology, is love of wisdom. It is the systemized study of general and fundamental questions such as those about existence, reason, knowledge, values, mind, and language. Such questions are often posed as problems to be studied or resolved. Now, you may be wondering why I'm going through the definitions. So that way we can be able to understand. So now, here's the question. Well, where is the connection between science, spirituality, and philosophy? What do science and spirituality have in common? What they both have in common is philosophy, because both of them come out the school of philosophy, right? But if you really want to argue the case, science came out the school of spirituality. And how is that the case? Because those who practice or study spiritual system, they were using what they call today the pre-science, right? And that pre-science became modern science. So spirituality was the precursor of science. So that's when modern science developed into existence, because it developed out of that school of spiritual thoughts. So those who were practicing traditional medicine, they study spiritual systems. Those who were studying about stars and all of that good stuff, they were dealing with spiritual system. Okay. And then when you're looking at the names of the planets, the days of the week, the months of the year, it was named after those who were deities. Okay. It was named after gods. So the only difference is science brings about the advancement that spirituality, science bring about the advancement, right, by using technology that spirituality can use. So spirituality will merely be based on belief system, but not just belief system, but they use a lot of nomenclature to be able to have some type of connection with the natural force or the natural phenomenon. Whereas science tried to bring by explanation, right, through testable objects or using possibility. But at the end of the day, if you were to take away all of that, you will see that they're pretty much the same, right? You would say that they pretty much the same, because in science they do what those in spirituality is doing. The only thing is that they pretty much just using technology just to further advance or try to figure out the mysteries of the universe, or come up with some type of way to bring about some healing, medicine, etc. That's it. But at the end of the day, you see a lot of similarity. And in science, they don't use nomenclature like they do in spirituality. Okay? So let's go ahead. To back this argument up, let's look at those who study astronomy, right? And astrophysics. Okay? So let's look at astronomy. Let's look at the history of astronomy real fast, because this is how we'll learn. So what is astronomy? So astronomy deals with the science that studies the laws of the stars. It's a natural science that studies celestial objects and phenomena. It uses mathematics, physics, and chemistry in order to explain their origin and evolution. So objects of interest include planets, moons, stars, nebulae, galaxy, and comets. Relevant phenomena include supernova explosion, gamma rays bursts, quasar, blazar, and pulsar, and cosmic microwave background radiation, right? And check this out. More generally, astronomy studies everything that originates beyond Earth's atmosphere. Cosmology is a branch of astronomy that studies the universe as a whole. Now, cosmology is not only a scientific study, but it's also considered as a metaphysics as well. But we're going to get into cosmology in a minute. Now, check this out. It says astronomy is one of the oldest natural science. The early civilization in recording history made methodological observation of the night sky. These included the Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, Egyptians, Chinese, Maya, and many ancient indigenous people of the Americas. In the past, astronomy included discipline as diverse as astrometry, celestial navigation, observational astronomy, and the makings of calendars. Nowadays, professional astronomy is often said to be the same as astrophysics. But let's go and look at astrology. Let's look at astrology. Now, astrology is a pseudoscience that claims to discern information about humans' affairs and terrestrial events by studying the movements and relative position of celestial objects, right? Astrology has been practiced since at least the second millennium BCE and has its roots in calendar systems used to predict seasonal shift and to interpret celestial cycles as sign of divine communication. What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like to you? That sounds like astronomy has took place of astrology. Because remember, it was astrology that was making the claims about the the stars and the planets, etc., right? And how it has a connection with human life, right? Divine communication. But when astronomy came into place, it replaced astrology. Okay, because again, you're using technological advances, right? But let me show you how the astrophysics and the astronomers have something in similar. Okay, and then I'm gonna go into cosmology. A lot of y'all may not be familiar with this terminology right here. Right here, this is called astrotheology. Now, what is astrotheology? Astrotheology, astro mysticism, astro religion, astro or stellar theology, also referred to as astro or star worship. It's the worship of stars individually together as the night sky, the planets and other heavenly bodies as deities, or the association of deities with heavenly bodies. And anthropological literature, these system of practice may be referred to as astral cults. Now check this out. The most common instances of this are sun gods and moon gods in polytheistic system worldwide. Also notable is the association of planets with deities in Babylon and hence in Greco-Roman religion, right? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Gods, goddesses, and demons may also be considered personification of astronomical phenomena such as lunar eclipse, planetary alignments, and apparent interaction of planetary bodies with the stars. Now, you're telling me people who are astronomers, right, or astrophysicists, they don't do some type of ritual? Because they dealing with some type of ritual. It's just the only difference is they're not using, they don't call it a religion. They're not using a nomenclature. But it's very similar. At the end of the day, they're giving obligation to what? To the universe. They studying the universal patterns. They studying the star constellation, right? They studying the moon. They study the planets. They study how these things are acting, right? And they trying to find answers. They trying to connect the dots. So it's very similar. That's what they're doing at the end of the day. If you really think about it, it's like you're turning to the universe, right? You're giving credence to the universe just by studying it, just by trying to learn its behavior. But you're not exact. The only thing is you're just not using nomenclature. You're not having some type of altar. You're not having some type of temple where you do it at. But it's very similar. Who you think they learned this from? They learned from those who was into spiritual systems. But what they did, they took what they learned from those in the spiritual system and they just advanced it further. So they took some of the information and the rest they discarded. But you can see some of the spiritual components that's happening within scientific fields. Okay. So now before I go any further, let me go ahead and read the comments. Let me see. Let me see if I can read the comments on my phone. Oh, all right then. Well, I guess I'm good. Okay, so William Woodwell would be a good person to pull from on this subject, since he is the only mainly acknowledged by academics for separation of scientific conversation from spiritual conversation, and even credited as one who coined the titles or words such as scientist. Again, William Winwell. Okay. Let's see. You can look at the compass. The compass was originally a divination device that over time became a scientific tool. See, great example. Thank you, Vinyasa. Now you said you can look at compass, right? The compass was originally a divination device that over time became a scientific tool. So let's look at the compass real fast. Let's look at the compass. All right, so let's look at the compass right here. So speaking of the compass, I'm glad that you brought that up. So the compass is a magnetometer used for navigation and orientation that shows direction in regards to the geographic cardinal points. The structure of a compass consists of compass rows which display the four main directions: east, south, west, and north. The angle increases the clockwise position. North corresponds to 0 degree. So east is 90 degree, south is 180 degree, and west is 270 degree. It said the history of compass started more than 2,000 years during the Han Dynasty, right? The first compass were made of idol stone, a naturally magnetized stone of iron in Han Dynasty, China. And goes on to say it was called South Point fish and used for landing navigation by the mid 11th century during the Song Dynasty. Then as you go down, it says the first usage of a compass in Western Europe was recorded in around 1190, and in the Islamic world 1232. Dry compass began appearing around 1269 in medieval Europe and 1300 in medieval Islamic world. This was replaced in the early 20th century by the liquid filled magnetic compass. All right, as you can see, look at that. Watch this. And to piggy off of what Vinyasa was saying, he said, all right, so based on Coaster and Cole's discovery of Olmec hematite artifact, Mesoamerica radiocarbon dated to 1400 to 1000 BC, astronomer John Carlson has hypothesized that the Olmec might have used the geomagnetic ladystone earlier than 1000 BC for geomancy, a method for divination, which, if proven true, predates the Chinese use of magnetism for feng shui by a millennium. Carlson speculates that the Olmecs used similar artifacts as a directional device for astronomical or geomagnetic purpose, but does not suggest navigational usage. The artifact is part of a polished hematite bar with a groove at one end and possibly used for sighting. All right, so to kind of just picky off of what he was saying that what Vinyasa was saying, that the compass was used as a form of divination. So we can see that on the account. We can see that those in the ancient time period was basically those who was practicing spirituality, right? They were using what we know today as scientific tools, okay, to be able to have some type of connection with the universe. So when people argue that those who are in the spiritual system don't use science, it's like, well, That's not necessarily true, because they do use science. They just not using technological science. They doing it in the way that it was done in the ancient time period, or in the period before science came into existence, the pre-science period, right? So in a way, they do have some form of scientific knowledge. It's just not on the Western level, or it may not be in a modern scientific way, because at the end of the day, modern science went back and studied those who were into those who were indigenous people, right? Or in the indigenous tribe that was into spiritual system. They went back and studied these people. They studied how they went about using their advances, how they went about being able to have some type of understanding about the natural phenomenon, right? So ask yourself, why you think physicists sit down and have a conversation with those who are spiritualists? Why do you think physicists try to find the concept of consciousness by talking to those who are spiritualists? That's the reason why. Do you think you can really separate spirituality from science? In some ways you can, but in other ways you can't, because you will understand there is the connection between spirituality and science. Even if you are an atheist and you don't believe in any type of spiritual system, well, it's funny that you don't believe in any type of spiritual system, but you can believe in what CERN say, right? CERN is the European Organization of Nuclear Research. You know, you guys can look at what CERN is saying. What do you think CERN is doing? What do you think exactly what CERN is doing when they trying to, as far as their research is concerned? They're trying to study the particles, right? What is called the God particle. Or they trying to study this mystery particle, or what's going on behind the universe, or what's taking place within that universe or behind it. So they're looking for something. But it's just funny when I hear atheists in particularly say things like, oh, that's spookism. Well, if that's the case, then you might as well say science is spookism, right? I mean, just think about it. You might as well say science spookism, because science come from out of the school of spirituality, because spirituality was the pre-science before modern science came into existence. All right. Now it says, I say the compass because A, is true. B, it demonstrates a scientific tool or spiritual ideal can help an individual find their way in this world of ours. Okay. Good argument. Rene Descartes and Thomas Willis argued that Willis' awareness of aspect of the brain circle of Willis was the seat of the soul. Oh, shoot. And see, that's nothing. When we talk about soul and all that, who you think was the early psychologist? Before there was psychologists, right? Before there was a therapist and all that, who you think was the earliest form of psychologist? Who you think that was studying psychology before psychology became modern? Those that was into the spiritual system. Because they were trying to relate into the concept of soul and spirituality, or bring about spirit and soul in connection. Now, let's go ahead. Let's look at cosmology real fast. Because, see, a lot of people... So when we're looking at cosmology is, consists of different branches, right? Now, what you see here, it says cosmology is a branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of the universe. The term cosmology was first used in English in 1656 in Thomas Blanc's Glossographia, and in 1731 taken up in Latin by German philosopher Christian Wolff in Cosmologia Generalis. Religious or mythological cosmology is a body of beliefs based on mythological, religious, and esoteric literature and tradition of creation myths and eschatology. And the science of astronomy is concerned with the study of the chronology of the universe. Hey, Simon. Peace, Simon. How you doing? Now, when we get down to it, we'll see what it says physical cosmology. So physical cosmology is the study of the observable universe origin, its large-scale structures and dynamics, and the ultimate fate of the universe. Includes the laws of science that govern these areas. It is navigated by scientists such as astronomers and physicists, as well as philosophers such as metaphysicians, philosopher of physics, and philosopher of space and time. Now it says because of this shared scope with philosophy, theories in physical cosmology may include both scientific and non-scientific proposition and may depend upon assumptions that cannot be tested, right? And it goes on to say physical cosmology is a sub-branch of astronomy that is concerned with the universe as a whole. Modern physical cosmology is dominated by the Big Bang theory, which attempts to bring together observational astronomy and particle physics. More specifically, a standard paramineralization of the Big Bang with dark matter and dark energy known as lambda CDM model. So again, what you see is cosmology is broken down into various groups. Cosmology is studied as a scientific field that deals with the origin of the universe, right? But it also deals with the metaphysical part of the universe, okay? It's broken down as metaphysics, which metaphysics is what? A form of philosophy, okay? And then you have what they call the mythological cosmology, right? All right. So then when we go further down here, let's go further down. Let's go down. So it says the universe is generally understood to have begun with the Big Bang, following almost instantaneously by cosmic inflation and expansion of space, from which the universe is thought to have emerged 3.7999 billion years ago, right? So the cosmogony studied the origin of the universe, and cosmography maps the features of the universe. Okay? So it's a lot of things you got to go into this. See, now, let's look at alchemy. We're going to look at alchemy, and we're going to see the relationship with alchemy. And then I'm going to go into some books, right? Some books that I have. So just bear with me. All right, so now let's walk through this. Alchemy. Now, when it says alchemy is an ancient branch of natural philosophy, a philosophical and proto-science tradition that was historically practiced in China, India, in the Muslim world, and Europe. Okay? Now, people say alchemy is considered as pseudo-science, right? And it says alchemists attempted to purify, mature, and perfect certain materials. Okay? So it says common aims were chrysopia, the transmutation of base metals into noble metals, right? The creation of acellar of immortality and the creation of panaceas able to cure any disease. The perfection of the human body and soul was thought to result from the alchemical magnum opus, which is great work. The concept of creating a philosopher's stone was variously connected with all of these projects. All right. So now let's go ahead and let's look at the history. So the history said that alchemy encompasses several philosophical traditions spanning some 4 millennia and 3 continents. These traditions general penchant for cryptic and symbolic language makes it hard to trace their mutual influence and genetic relationship. One can distinguish at least 3 major strands, which appears to be mostly independent, at least in their early stages. Chinese alchemy centered in China, Indian alchemy centered in the Indian subcontinent, Western alchemy which occurred around the Mediterranean and which centers has shifted over the millennia from Greco-Roman Egypt to the Islamic world and finally medieval Egypt. Chinese alchemy was closely connected to Taoism, and Indian alchemy with the Dharmic faith. In contrast, Western alchemy developed its philosophical system mostly independent of but influenced by various Western religions. It is still an open question whether these strands share a common origin or to what extent they influence each other. Okay, so as you can see, in the Islamic world, India, as you can see, Taoism, all of that. So now let's go into talking about chemistry, because this is where chemistry comes in. Check this out right here. Chemistry, the history of chemistry spans a period from very old times to the present. Since several millennia BC, civilization were using technologies that would eventually form the basis of the various branches of chemistry. Examples include extracting metals from ores, making pottery and glazes, fermenting beer and wine, extracting chemicals from plants for medicine and perfume, rendering fat into soap, making glass and, and making all those science. What? Alchemy, which is an intuitive but non-scientific approach to understanding the constituents of matter and their interaction. All right, so now what is chemistry? So chemistry is the scientific study of the properties and behavior of matter. It is a natural science that covers the elements that make up matter to the compounds composed of atoms, molecules, and ions, their position, structure, properties, behavior, and changes they undergo during a reaction with other substances. Okay, so what you're dealing with is what? Chemical reaction. That's what you deal with. So again, chemistry came out the school of alchemy. All right. And alchemy was used in spiritual systems. Okay. All right. So now let me go ahead and get into the sources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the list of books that I recommend people to use. Uh, shit. Mm. I got so many books over here. So right here, the first one we're going to talk about the ancient origin of consciousness, which deals with science. Okay, so you got the mystery of subjectivity, the general biological and special neurobiological features of conscious animal, the birth of brains. So let's look at the birth of brains. Hmm. Well, you know what? Let me not even start there. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the mystery of subjectivity. So it says multiple paths to solving the mystery of consciousness. We propose that hard problem of subjectivity remains mysterious because each field of study that is interested in its solution only address it from the perspective of its own set of questions and answers. In this book, we endeavor to tackle the hard problem with three different approaches, each important in its own way, yet each incomplete. These three approaches are the philosophical, neurobiological, and neuroevolutionary domain. So it says the philosophical approach, the gap between subjectivity and objectivity, right? Said the major philosophical question is whether and how subjective experience can be explained by any objective scientific theory. Philosopher John Searle ascribes this difficulty to the first person ontology of consciousness, where ontology has to do with being, reality, essence, and fundamental nature. And it says consciousness has a first person or subjective ontology and so cannot be reduced to anything that has third person or objective ontology. If you try to reduce or eliminate one in favor of the other, you leave something out. Biological brains have a remarkable biological capacity to produce experiences, and these experiences only exist when they are felt by some human or animal agent. You can't reduce these first person subjective experience to third person phenomena for the same reason that you can't reduce third person phenomena to subjective experiences. You can neither reduce the neuron firing to the feeling nor the feeling of the neuron firings, because in each case you would leave out the objectivity or subjectivity that is in question. Okay. So going down here, it talks about the four ontologically subjective features of consciousness. Therefore, the most problematic characteristic of sensory or primary consciousness from the philosophical perspective are its first person as experimental aspect. But upon close analysis, we find that rather than there being a single explanatory or explanatory gap, there are in fact multiple gaps between subjective experience and the brain. So to delineate these gaps as systematically as possible, we identify four neuro-ontologically subjective features of consciousness. So the NSFCs have in common the following features. They are ontologically subjective, and there is an explanatory gap between the way each is experienced by the brain versus the way each is observed or understood from the third person perspective. The phenomenon of qualia is the most frequently considered of the NSFCS, but we recognize three more: the referral, mental unity, and mental causation. All right, so in this book really like goes into how consciousness was explained from the ancient time period. So this is one of the books that I recommend. Hold on. Okay. And this book right here, it deals with the mind, psychology, the untold story of how your mind works, right? Now let's go over this book real fast. Let's go over this book real fast by David Lloyd Shepard. All right, so here it is, the concept about the center of the universe, right? So it says, in the year of his death, 1543, Nicholas Copernicus released his manuscript showing that the Earth was only one planet going around the sun. He did not live to see its consequences. He probably could have not imagined that it would take nearly 400 years before the average person would know its truth. So today, almost 500 years after Copernicus, if you query the National Science Foundation about how many Americans believe the sun goes around the Earth, you find that 25% of Americans still believe the sun goes around the Earth, despite decades of astronauts in space. Yet, nearly 90% of Americans know who are the Kardashians. Challenge yourself to see if you can understand how the minds of genius came to understand something no one else in their time ever understood, and how others react to their heretical idea. We know how Galileo later came to understand this was an illusion. He looked through his new 20x telescope, saw four moons revolving around Jupiter, saw the phases of Venus like the phases of our moon, and made the jump in part by analogy. Our moon was around us just like the moons around Jupiter, and we were all going around the sun. So now, speaking of Galileo and Copernicus, they both came out of religious schools of Christianity, right? And what they did was they stepped outside the box of Christianity. Both were Catholics. So they challenged the Catholics' idea about the universe or about the earth. They said that the earth was the center, and in the Catholic Church, they taught that the earth was the center and the sun revolved around the earth instead of the earth revolving around the sun, right? So what they did, they challenged each of the information that was presented, and they put themselves at risk. Because see, at one point in time, religion of those who study spirituality, they thought they had the answers as to how the universe came into existence, or how the sun came into what it is. You know what I'm saying? They thought they had the answers. So when you look at Genesis, right, in the Bible, the Genesis is supposedly to tell the story about the origin of the universe, the origin of the earth, okay, and how man came into existence. And that's what people went by. So they feel like if they had the answer, if whatever they say is correct, that's what it is. And if anybody went against that, then you went against the concept of God. So if you went against God, then it was punishable. So especially in Galileo's sense, he was punished because he went against the Catholic Church. So it's like you could not prove the Catholic Church wrong about anything. So whatever they he was one of the first people to use testable objects, right, to bring about possibility, right? Go through the concept of trial and error. Same way with Copernicus. He went through trial and error. So let's go ahead and let's continue. All right, so it says, but Copernicus had no telescope. How could he possibly have understood with no telescope? Few grasp the importance of Copernicus' manuscript. If you go outside and watch the sun, you will see it move across the face of the earth. Go outside at night, you will see the stars all move in unison across the face of the earth. No one doubted we were in the center of all creation. Okay, so it says the Mars moved backwards in sight. Copernicus had no knowledge that was not readily available to every astronomer of his day. All knew that planets, a Greek word that means wanderer, did not move in unison with the stars. So over a period of months, Mars would move shiftily across the sky against the background of stars. Then Mars would start to slow down, hang suspension against the background of stars. Then then turn around and rush in the opposite direction. Astronomers call it the retrograde motion of the planets. Now, why do people get caught up in the retrograde? What is that associated with when they talk about retrograde? That associated with a form of spirituality. When people talk about the blood moon, right? What is the blood moon associated with? What is the blood moon associated with? The blood moon is associated with a form of spirituality. So why do scientists find such a fascination to study about the blood moon? Where did they get that from? Where did they get that idea from? They got it from those who were studying spirituality. I mean, you guys see spiritual connection in modern science. If you don't see that, then you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention. So even those who say that they don't deal with spirituality, in a way you do. You just don't deal with it in the totality, but you take some of its components and use it in modern science. Use it in technological advances. That's all you're doing. You furthering it. That's it. Now it says Mars could become brighter for months and then become increasingly dim. This happened repeatedly, totally unpredictably. How could this be? It made no sense. Copernicus compared two models of the universe, one with the Earth as the center and one with the Sun as the center. He realized that only the one with the Sun in the center, where the Earth and Mars were both planets going around the Sun, could explain what caused this mystery. What he saw in his model was this: because the Earth goes around the Sun almost twice for every one time Mars goes around the Sun, it follows that Earth will pass by Mars twice as Mars makes one orbit. All right, so again, check this book out. Okay. And also check this book out right here, which is called The Beginning of Western Science. Now let me go into this book right here. All right, so let's go into this. All right, so it talks about the prehistoric attitudes toward nature. From the beginning, the survival of human race has depended on its ability to cope with the natural environment. Prehistoric people developed impressive technologies for obtaining necessity of life. They learned how to make tools, start fires, obtain shelter, hunt fish, and gather fruits and vegetables. Successful hunting and food gathering, and after about 7,000 or 8,000 BC, settled agriculture required a substantial knowledge of animal behavior and the characteristics of plants. At a more advanced level, prehistoric people learned to distinguish between poisonous and therapeutic herbs. They developed a variety of crafts, including pottery, weaving, and metalworking. By 3,500, they had invented the wheel. They were aware of the seasons and perceived the connection between the season and various celestial phenomena. In short, they knew a great deal about their environment. So how do you think the earliest form of technology came into existence? It was manually. So if we break down the word of technology, what does the word technology really mean? The word technology really means arts and crafts. That's all technology is, arts and crafts. So it was done manually. It was done by hand. Okay? Before it became automatic, meaning that the machine was operating on its own. All you gotta do now is press a button and the machine does everything. But at one point in time, people were doing things manually. Okay? Now, it goes on to say, but the word no, seemingly so clear and simple, is almost as tricky as the term science. Indeed, it brings us back to the distinction between technology and theoretical science. It is one thing to know how to do things, another to know why they behave as they do. One can engage in sophisticated carpentry, for example, without any theoretical knowledge of stressing in the timbers one employs. An electrician with only the most rudimentary knowledge of electrical theory can successfully wire a house. It is possible to differentiate between poisonous and therapeutic herbs without possessing any biochemical knowledge that would explain poisonous or therapeutic properties. Okay? And it says the point is simply that the practical rules of thumb can be effectively employed even in the face of total ignorance of the theoretical principle that lies behind them. You can have know-how without theoretical knowledge. And that's very true. You got people that know how to fix things that has no technological knowledge of science. They just got the natural gift of being able to fix things, like those who know how to fix cars, right? They don't know about the technological advances of cars like that. They just know how to put in the transmission, put in the motor, put in the engine, right? Oil change. They just got that natural gift of doing so without understanding the radical knowledge behind it. And we know people like that in our community, right? We know people like that in our hoods. They know how to fix some damn cars, and they can't tell you any technological stuff besides the transmission motor and what's wrong with it. They can't tell you anything else. They can't give you like technical names and all of that, right? Because they have not went to school. They had not received formal education about that, but they just know how to do it because that's a way for them to hustle and get by. All right, but let me go ahead and continue, because I know y'all might think, well, what point are you trying to make here? Well, I'm going to show you something. Oral tradition, check this out. Oral tradition is typically in continuous state of evolution as it absorbs new experiences and adjusts to new conditions and needs within the community. Now, this fluidity of oral tradition would be extremely frustrating if the function of oral tradition were conceived as the communication of abstract, historical, or scientific data, the oral equivalent of a historical archive or a scientific report. Now it says the primary function of oral tradition is very practical, one of explaining and thereby justifying the present state and structure of community, supplying the community with a continuously evolving social charter. For example, an account of past events may be employed with legitimate current leadership roles, property rights, or distribution of privileges and obligation. And in order to serve this function effectively, oral tradition must be capable of adjusting itself fairly rapidly to changes in social structures. Now, what we're dealing with the culture. So spirituality is in connection with the culture because it brings about cultural continuity, right? Which brings about human evolution. Now, going back to the argument what we made about, can human evolution survive without culture? Or what is the driving force of human evolution, biology or culture, right? And what's the driving force of human evolution is culture. Biology is one thing that brings about human existence, but culture is what keeps it continuously. It keeps it perpetuated, it keeps it going. So within the culture, you have spirituality and religion. That's part of the cultural system, okay? That's part of it. So many cultures relied on oral tradition versus writing tradition. Okay, a lot of things weren't written down. A lot of things was passed down orally. All right. So when we look at spirituality, we have to understand spirituality is associated and it's in connection with culture. Yeah, it's in connection with culture. So it says, but here we are, principally interested in the content of oral tradition, especially those portions of the content that deals with the nature of the universe, the portion that might be thought of as ingredients of worldview or cosmology. Such ingredients exist within every oral tradition, but often beneath the surface, seldom articulated and almost never assembled into a coherent whole. It follows that we must be extremely reluctant or to articulate the worldview of pre-literated people on their behalf, for this cannot be done without our supplying the elements of coherence and system, thereby distorting the very conception we are attempting to portray. We may if we are careful, formulate certain conclusion about the ingredients of elements of worldview within proliferate oral tradition. Uh-huh. All right. So it said it is clear that illiterate people, no less than those of us who live in a modern scientific culture, need explanatory principles capable of bringing order, unity, and especially meaning to apparently random and chaotic flow of events. But we should not expect the explanatory principle accepted by politically people to resemble our lacking of any conception of laws of nature, deterministic causal mechanism. Their idea of causation is then well beyond the sort of mechanical or physical action acknowledged by modern science. It is natural that in the search of meaning, they should proceed within the framework of their own experience, projecting human or biological traits onto objects and events that seem to us devoid not only of humanity in terms of birth and cosmic events may be interpreted as the outcome of struggle between opposing forces, one good and the other evil. There is an inclination in political cultures not only to personalize but also to individualize causes to suppose that things happen as they do because they have been willed to do so. This tendency has been described by H.A. Frankfurt. Our view of casualty will not satisfy a primitive man because of the impersonal character of his explanation. It would not satisfy him, moreover, because of its generality. We understand phenomena not by what makes them peculiar, but by what makes them manifestation of general laws. But a general law cannot do justice to the individual character of each event. And the individual character of the event is precisely what early man experiences most strongly. We may explain the certain physiological process caused a man's death. Primitive man asks, why should this man die thus at this moment? We can only say that given condition, death will always occur. He wants to find a cause as specific and individual as the event which it must explain. The event is experienced and its complexity and individuality, and these are matched by equally individual causes. Okay. So again, a lot of things start off as oral tradition. It start off as storytelling, right? So what you do, which is subjective, okay, and it deals with the mythology. But how do you prove that mythology? That's when science came in to bring about testable objects and possibility, right? So as we can see here, it goes on to say about an African myth describes the earth as a mat that has been unrolled but remained tilted, thereby explaining upstream and downstream an illustration of general tendency to describe the universe in terms of familiar objects and processes. Deity is an omnipresent reality within the world of oral tradition. Though in general no clear distinction is drawn between the natural and the supernatural and the human, the gods do not transcend the universe but are rooted in it and subject to its principle. Belief in the existence of ghosts of the dead, spirits, and a variety of invisible powers which magical ritual allows one to control is another universal feature of oral tradition. Reincarnation, the idea that after death the soul returns in another body, either human or animal, is widely believed in. Conception of space and time are not like those of modern physics, abstract and mathematical, but are invested with meanings and value drawn from the experience of the community. For example, the cardinal direction for a community whose existence is closely connected to a river might be upstream and downstream rather than north, south, east, and west. Some oral tradition had difficulty conceiving of more than a very shallow past. An African tribe, the Tio, for example, cannot situate anybody further back in time than 2 generations. So the point that I'm getting at is without oral tradition, without mythology, without spirituality, there will be no modern science of today. Without oral tradition, without mythology, without spirituality, I don't think modern science would be in existence today. I don't think there would be no need to have modern science if there was no spirituality and oral tradition. and mythologies. But we have modern science because of these things, because there were people that was into these systems, right? That came up in these community that was very curious, and they wanted to know, well, how can these things be proven? What can we do? How do we go about testing these things? So that's when later on they stepped outside and they started to develop their own type of system, which is scientific methodology. They started to build technological advances to be able to study more in depth into this natural phenomenon, study more into the universe, being able to bring about more advancement into medicine. They came from these spiritual systems. They came from these customs. They came from these communities that taught these things. Again, if these communities did not exist, there would be no need to have modern science. And prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. If these spirituality, mythology, and oral tradition did not exist, would there be a need for modern science? Will modern science be where it's at today without these things? Think about it. No. Modern science will not be where it's at today. All right, so now let me go ahead and go on to the next page, right? So it talks about the Babylonian myth, right? So it says a Babylonian myth attributes the origin of the world to the sexual activity of the Enki, god of the waters. Enki impregnates the gods of the earth or soil, Nehursag. This union of water and earth gave rise to vegetation represented by the birth of the goddess of the plants, Nisar. Enki subsequently mated first with his daughter, then with his granddaughter to produce various specific plants and plant products. Nehursag angered when Enki devoured 8 of the new plants before she had the opportunity to name them, pronounced a curse on him. Fearing the consequence of Enki's demise, apparently a drying up of the waters, the other gods prevailed on Nehursag to resolve the curse and heal Enki of the various alignments induced by the curse, which she did by giving birth to 8 healing deities, each associated with a part of the body, thus accounting for the origin of the healing arts. Now check this out. It will be convenient to pause for a moment on the healing arts, which can serve to illustrate some important characteristics of oral cultures. There can be no doubt that healing practices were extremely important in ancient oral cultures where primitive condition made disease and injure everyday realities. Minor medicine problems such as wounds and lesion were no doubt treated by family members. More dramatic alignments, major wounds, broken bones, severe and unexpected illness might require assistance from somebody with more advanced knowledge and skills. A certain amount of medical specialization thus came into existence. Some members of the tribe or the village became known for herb gathering ability, proficiency in the setting of bones, or the treatment of wounds, or experience in assisting at childbirth. Are y'all paying attention? Well, you probably ain't, but that's okay. I'm gonna continue. It says a more careful look reveals the healing art within oral cultures to inseparable and indistinguishable from religion and magic. The wise woman or the medicine man was valued not simply for pharmaceutical or surgical skills, but also for the knowledge of the divine and dramatic causes of disease and the magical and religious rituals by which it could be treated. Okay? If the problem was a splinter, a wound, a familiar rash, a digestive complaint, or a broken bone, the healer responded in the obvious ways. By removing the splinter, binding the wound, applying a substance, if one were known, that would counteract the rash, issuing dietary prohibitions, and setting and splinting the broken limb. But if a family member became mysteriously and gravely ill, one might suspect sorcery or invasion of the body by an alien spirit. In such cases, more dramatic remedies would be called for: exorcism, divination, purification, song, inclination, and other ritualistic activities. And to this day, scientists, right, when they want to come up with new development about medicine, what do? They go to these tribes. They go to these indigenous people that are studying these rituals, right, or doing these rituals, and they learn about the type of plants and type of herbs they use. Okay, and what they'll do is they'll study those herbs or they'll study those plants, and they'll try to incorporate them into modern medicine. Like, for example, the iboga. So if you guys don't know anything about the iboga, go study the iboga. It's a plant that comes from the Congo area, and it was said to be that that plant is used to overcome people's addiction to opioids. Okay, modern science are actually studying into this. They studying the chemical property and all of that, and how does it have some type of how is it in a way that it helps people to overcome their drug addiction, such as opioids addiction. All right. Then it goes on to say one last feature of beliefs and oral tradition, both ancient and contemporary, demands our attention, namely the simultaneous acceptance of what seems to us incapable alternatives without any apparent awareness that such behavior could present a problem. It says examples are innumerable, but it may suffice to note that the story of the nine whoops related above is one of seven or more myths of origin that circulates among the Kuba, while the Egyptian had a variety of alternatives to the story of Atum, Shun, Tifanu, and their offsprings, and nobody seems to notice or else to care that all of them could not be true. Add to this seemingly fanciful nature of many of the beliefs described above, and the question of primitive mentality is inevitably raised. Did the member of politerate societies possess a mentality that was preological or mystical or in some other way different from our own? And if so, exactly how is this mentality to be described and explained? All right, so I'm just going to leave off with that. And this is a good book, okay? So this deals with the science before the Greeks, right? This is chapter 1, Science Before the Greeks. The beginning of Western science. Check this book out. All right, so of course, I always recommend this book right here, The History of Philosophy. So if you guys want to study this book, it's called Quantum Physics for Beginners. I ain't gonna go into this book, but just showing you guys this book. Let's see. And see, I always recommend this brother's book because check this book out. See, a lot of folks always want to talk about what's pseudo and what's not pseudo, this, day, other. But if you actually read this brother's book right here, African Creation Energy book, okay, Brother Ace, what he does is show the spiritual connection with science, right? So he used the nomenclature, he used the personification, he used the give me a moment. Let me drink some water. He always used the nomenclature, right? He used the quasi allegories. He used personification. He used anthropomorphism to describe the technicality of modern science. All right. So this brother does have a degree in science. Okay, he has a degree in engineering, I think, and he has a degree in well, he got a degree in engineering, and I think he got a degree in physics. I think it's either physics or mathematics, one of them. I know he got a degree. Yeah, yeah, he got a degree in engineering, and he has a degree in yeah, he has a degree in physics. Yeah, a degree in engineering and physics. Yeah. So this brother has an actual degree, but the reason why he wrote the book the way he did because he know his audience. So most of his audience is those that's within the African American community, and he used personification, quasi allegories, right, and used the stories about the oral tradition to help better explain the context of modern science. So now let me go into his book. All right, so let's go into check this out. This is what he said right here. So this book is called Non-Ether Re-Engineering. And in this book, he says the gas you breathe out is no different from the exhaled or smoke from a fire. The excrement and waste you produce is no different from the ashes left over from a fire. Thus, what you call life is no more than the thermodynamic cycles of the transfer of energy in a series of chemical reaction. Your thoughts of consciousness is a flow of electrons or electricity that occurs during the energy transfer of thermodynamic cycles during the chemical reaction of life. You are a thermodynamic process. Your purpose is to create and transform matter and energy via your thermodynamic process. You are in turn transformed by a thermodynamic process. Comprehend these concepts of thermodynamics well. Each position in the thermodynamics diagram not only refers to a state of energy, but also mentality, personality, and spirit. Applying the science of thermodynamics provides you with the ability to transform anything at will. The practical application of thermodynamics enables the practitioner to figuratively create something from nothing, which is indeed a divine capability. Okay. Then he goes back to say the allegory, parables, and analogy related to thermodynamics found in African theology and theory provide effective mental tools for comprehending the subject of thermodynamics. All right. So in this book, he uses African symbols. He used the Congo symbols, right, which is the Kinga, Akan, which is the Ganame, and he used the Lusona, and of course he used the Nun and the Wapu symbol and stuff like that. But if you guys can see the page, okay. And then he goes on to say, each position on thermodynamic diagram not only refers to a state of energy, but also the mentality and personality and spirit. Applying the science of thermodynamics provides you with the ability to transform anything at will. The practical application of thermodynamics enables the practitioner to figuratively create something from nothing, which is indeed a divine capability. All right. So, and then he goes on to talk about that in the ancient Greek mythology, Ether was a deity who was the personification of the upper air, atmosphere, sky, and heavens. Then he goes on to mention in his book as well, in the ancient Egypt, the personification of the wind, air, atmosphere, and gases in general was the deity named Shu. Shu was the husband of the goddess Tephanut, who represented moisture or liquids in nature. Tephanut was depicted as a woman wearing the feline lioness mask. In ancient Egyptian mythology, both Shu and Tephanut were children of the sun deity Atumare, right? The relationship and personification of the wind and water can also be found in West African Orisha tradition, with the deity Oya Asan represent wind and Yemaya represent water. Do you see how he made that connection between spirituality and science? So again, what would modern science be without the concept of dealing with spirituality and mythology and oral tradition? What would modern science be without dealing with the ethno science, the ethno medicine, or traditional medicine? Where would science be today? Okay. Let's see now what else he speaks on, right? So he spoke on the application of the science of thermodynamics as it applies to transition between liquids and gases lead to the development of one of the earliest forms of engines called the steam engine. Modern science credited the invention of the steam engine to a Greek man named Hero of Alexandria, who developed an object he called Eleopile. Eleopile, which literally means the ball of the Greek wind deity Alus, or is it Aliolis? Yeah, Aliolis was a hollow metal ball with exhausted pipes coming out of opposite ends and being fed by a pool of water. So the Aliopower was named after the Greek god named Aliois, right? It was named after Aliolis, okay? And that was the early form of steam engine. But check this out. It says the Aliopower demonstrated the fundamental scientific law that for every action there must be an equal and opposite reaction. Hero of Alexandria was a member of an ancient Greek organization called Atomis. All right, so let's look up what the Atomis is. All right, so right here, atomism. Atomism, right, is a natural philosophy proposing that the physical universe is composed of fundamental and indivisible components known as atoms. Check this out. Reference to the concept of atomism and its atoms appeared in both ancient Greek and ancient Indian philosophical traditions. The ancient Greek atomists theorized that nature consists of two fundamental principles, atom and void. Cluster of different shapes, arrangements, and positions give rise to the various macroscopic substance in the world. The particles of chemical matter for which chemists and other natural philosophers of the early 19th century found experimental evidence were thought to be indivisible and therefore were given by John Dalton the name atom, long used by atomist philosophy. Now, although the connection to historical atomism is at best tenacious, elementary particles have become a modern analog of philosophical atoms. Where do you think they learned the idea about atoms? Well, who do you think they got this from? Who do you think modern science got this from? They studied those Greeks who were atomists. Okay, so it goes into the history. Check this out. It says in the 5th century BC, Leucippus and his pupil Democritus proposed that all matter was composed of small indivisible particles called atoms. Nothing whatsoever is known about Leucippus except that he was the teacher of Democritus. Democritus, by contrast, was a prolific writer who wrote over 80 known treatises, none of which had survived to the present day complete. However, a massive number of fragments and quotation of his writings have survived. These are the main source of information on his teaching about atoms. Democritus' argument for the existence of atoms hinged on the idea that it is impossible to keep dividing matter for infinity and that matter must therefore be made up of extremely tiny particles. The atomistic theory aimed to remove the distinction which the eclectic school drew between the absolute or the only real existing and the world of change around us, right? So Democritus believed that atoms are too small for human sense to detect. They are infinitely many. They come in infinitely many varieties, and that they have always existed. They float in a vacuum, which Democritus called the void, and they vary in form, order, and posture. Some atoms he maintained are convex, other concave, some shaped like hooks, and others like eyes. They are constantly moving and colliding into each other. They are constantly moving and they are constantly moving and colliding into each other. Democritus wrote that atoms and void are the only things that exist, and that all other things are merely said to exist by social convention. The objects humans see in everyday life are composed of many atoms, unified random collision, and their forms and materials are determined by what kinds of atoms make them up. Likewise, human perception are caused by atoms as well. Bitterness is caused by small, angular, jagged atoms passing across the tongue, whereas sweetness is caused by larger, smoother, and more rounded atoms passing across the tongue. Okay? So you guys check out this information by atomism. So if you want to know where that concept of atoms came about, look up atomism. All right. And again, you guys should read this brother's book right here. I recommend it because this is the most simplest way to explain modern science just by reading his book. If you really want to get the understanding and get into science field, start off with this book. I recommend it. And he has another book right here, which is called Supreme Mathematics, African Ma'at Magic, right? Let's see what he's talking about in this book. You know, math is a form of science. It's an abstract science. That's what it is. All right, he got pictures in this book and everything. Now, according to him, what is mathematics? Mathematics is an intellectual and scientific tool created and invented by African people for the purpose of systematically studying, learning, and comprehending nature. Since mathematics is the intellectual tool tool used for studying nature, there is a field of mathematics that corresponds to every aspect of nature. In the broadest sense, nature consists of space, vacuum, matter, energy, and time existent. The field of mathematics called arithmetic deals with the basic counting and quantifying things found in nature with similar qualities. Algebra studies the formulas and equation of nature. Geometry and trigonometry studies the spaces and shape and forms of nature. Calculus studies the changes over the time in nature. Even the mental faculties of human are studied in the fields such as mathematical logic using binary algebra, which studies logic and reason, and statistics, which studies speculation and probability. Formal definition of mathematics states that mathematics is the scientific and systematic treatment and study of quantity, magnitude, multitude, form, structure, space, and change using symbolic objects to discover patterns, find solution, determine conclusion, and establish truth using rigorous deductive reasoning. The etymology of the word mathematics comes from the Greek word math. Mathematics. What's it? Hold on. Okay, I thought I was missing a page. Was it mathematia? Mathematia meaning to learn or to think, to have one's mind aroused. Huh, that's funny. Let's look at the word philomath, right? So what does the word philomath mean? So a person that's considered to be philomath is what? Because it's funny that he put in that definition. What does it mean to be a philomath? Kind of going off the subject just a little bit. So a philomath is a lover of learning and studying. So the term is Greek, philos, mean beloved, beloved and loving, as in philosophy or philanthropy, and Manatinean math is to learn, as in polymath, right? Philomathy is similar to, but distinguished from, philosophy in that the latter specify wisdom or knowledge rather than the process of acquisition thereof. Philomath is not synonymous with polymath, as polymath is someone who possesses great and detailed knowledge and facts from a variety of disciplines, while a philomath is someone who greatly enjoys learning and studying. So it's very funny. So as we look up the word philomath, right, the shift in the meaning for mathema is likely a result of the rapid characterization during the time of Plato and Aristotle of their mathemata in terms of education, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Okay, the quadrivium, which the Greeks found to create a natural grouping of mathematical in the modern usage, doctrina mathematica in the ancient usage, percepts. All right, so it's just very interesting that in this book right here, the brother used the term mathematia, which meaning to learn, to think, to have one's mind aroused to be wise, wide awake, and lively. It makes you think of the word philomath. The suffix, right, showing version of the Greek word technique, as in technique, in the word mathematics, meaning system, process, method, art, or craft. Thus, the etymological sense of the word mathematics is the art of thinking, systematic learning, or thought process. So, were those people who studied into the spiritual system or come from certain tribes, were they not philomaths? Did they not love to learn? Were they not polymath? Did they not have various skills? They did. They had various skills, but they did not have the ability to articulate it into the modern sense that we articulate things. They just had the skill sets, and they were able to rely on their spiritual beliefs, right? So they use their spiritual beliefs or their spiritual interpretation of being able to build a society, build a culture, right? And be able to build objects. Okay? All right, so it says modern scientists classify mathematics as a form of science to distinguish it from other fields of science called natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, because the natural sciences rely on experimentation, evidence, and the scientific method to arrive at the scientific result and conclusion, whereas mathematicians use definition, abstraction, logic, and reason as the basis of mathematical proofs, concepts, and conclusion. All right. So it says the four basics steps to scientific method are observation, hypothesis, testing, and conclusion, while the other four basic steps to the mathematical method are comprehension, analysis, synthesis, and conclusion. The mental ideas, concepts, and symbols and abstraction that form the basis of mathematics are called mathematical objects. So mathematical objects are used to model and represent various observed aspects in reality and the natural world. Example of some modern mathematical objects includes numbers, function, formula, equations, groups, set, graphs, matrices, points, lines, triangles, circles, squares, cubes, etc. Mathematic objects exist as concepts and do not exist in reality. However, mathematic objects provide a way for the human mind to comprehend, explain, and to model reality. Proper understanding of this point enables the observer to distinguish what exists as a concept of what exists in reality. For example, it cannot be proven that the number two exists in reality. However, it can be proven that based on the definition of what the number two represents, examples can be found in reality that correspond what the number two represents by definition. The same is true for all mathematical objects. Thus, the best and most efficient mathematical objects are those concepts and ideas whose symbols closely correspond to the real phenomenon that they intend to represent. This mental process of conceptually, figuratively, and symbolically depicting, portraying, and displaying real natural phenomena for the purpose of learning, comprehending, applying, and manipulating nature began with the earliest humans in Africa. And so some example of the earliest African mathematical objects include many of the gods and goddesses like Ptah, Re, Tahuti, Ma'at, Heka, and their associated signs and symbols. Okay. All right. So as you can see, he used all the examples in his books right here. You see. All right. So again, I recommend this book, and I also have another book by him, which is called Ptah Technology. I have to find that book because I don't know what I did with it. I probably misplaced it. I don't know. All right. Um. Shoot. And also, if you guys don't have these books, you definitely need these books by Robin Walker. Blacks in Science, Volume 1, Ancient Egyptian Contribution to Science and Technology, The Mysterious Science of the Great Pyramid. Okay. And here is the second one. Robin Walker. Blacks and Science, Volume 3. Okay. So we're going to get to Volume 1, right? All right, so we're going to go to Volume 1. We're going to talk about Chapter 1, Mathematics. It says the ancient Greek Egyptian made important contributions to the origin and evolution of mathematics. The ancient Greek scientist Aristotle recognized this and wrote the following in his work Metaphysics, and thus Egypt was the cradle of mathematical arts. Four ancient Egyptian mathematical documents survive today and have been the subject of considerable research by modern scholars. The Rand Papyrus and the Berlin Papyrus and the Moscow Papyrus and Kahu Papyrus. These papyri indicates that a large portion of what we today consider high school mathematics was created by the ancient Egyptian. Okay. And then going to chapter 2. So chapter 2 talk about astronomy. What it says, astronomy is the science of mapping the heavenly bodies, including the sun, the moon, the stars, and other planets. Throughout the ages, humans have used astronomy to tell the time, devise calendars, ornated buildings as a guide to travel. So the ancient Egyptian pioneered the use of the sundial, the was it Calypsodira water clock, and the Mercat, a device using a straight edge in a plumb line to measure stars. The ancient Egyptian also wrote texts on astronomy that were famous in Greek and Roman times, but unfortunately have not survived in our time. One document was called On the Disposition of Fixed Stars and Stellar Phenomena. Another text was entitled On the Disposition of the Sun, Moon, and Five Planets. Yet another document was called On the Syzygies and the Phases of the Sun and Moon. A fourth text was called On Rising. All right, Duncan Manhattan, author of the Enrudic, a scheme of Egyptian chronology, reproduced an image of the astronomical ceiling in the tomb of Senetmut, a contemporary of Hatshepsut or Hatshepsut. The ceiling has 12 months of the year depicted. He also produced a picture of the heavens from the Ranzamu, again with the 12 months of the year depicted. The ancient Egyptians invented the 365-day solar calendar based on the astronomical observation. They also created the concept of the month and the zodiac based on the grouping of the stars. They grouped at least 43 stellar constellations. Their most important contribution of astronomy, however, was the creation of the zodiac or something cycle, which is superior to the leap year that we use today. The zodiac cycle is based on the fact that the Earth spins 365 1/4 times each. It orbits the sun. Since it is impractical to have the concept of 1/4 of a day, we moderns have adopted the practice of having a leap year of 366 days once every 4 years to correct this problem. And this come from this book. Let's see what he talk about in this book right here. Let's see what he talking about, the Blacks in Science, Volume 2. West and East African Contribution of Science and Technology and Intellectual Life and Legacy of Timbuktu. All right, so on here he talk about the Yoruba numerals, right? All right, so let's go ahead. He talks about the Yoruba numerals. He said, just imagine having to calculate 200 times 3 minus 20 times 4 plus 5 before being able to say 525. According to mathematician Professor Claudia Zalaski, an American specialist on African mathematics, you must be a mathematician to use Yoruba number system. For this reason, learning Yoruba numerals have a pedagogical value in Nigeria among some of the African Americans. Educators see the value in teaching this system to pupils since it gets them to use arithmetic and just being able to express the numbers. This system has in use for 100 years and may well date back to the glory days of Kingdom of Ife. So the Yorubas evolved a complicated numerical system that involves subtraction and multiplication to express a single number. The Yoruba phrase for 315 is Orin. Then Norinwo and Ordin Maroon, which is mathematical symbols, becomes 400 subtract 20 times 4 subtract 5, which is 315. The English equivalent 315 is simply 3 times 100 plus 15, making it use of multiplication and addition, but no use of subtraction. Many centuries ago, however, when Roman numerals were used across Europe, subtraction was also used. The Roman 5, for example, is 5 minus 1, right? No, the Roman numeral 4 is example 5 minus 1. And 1x, which is 9, is 10 minus 1. So in his book, he talks about the example of Roman numerals. So the I and B, which represents, the B represents 5 and the I represents 1. So 5 minus 1 represents 4. And then when you got the I and the X, right, the X represents 10 and 1 represents, and then the I represents 1. So 10 minus 1 equals 9. So I'm not good with Roman numerals like that, but yeah, that's how you understand the mathematics. Okay. Hmm. Okay. That's very interesting. That's really interesting. That's cool. To be honest, that's really cool. Wow. But anyways, the Yorubas had separated terms for 1 to 10. For example, Okan, Iji, Ita, Iren, Arun, Ifa, Iji, Ijo, Isan, and Iwa. From 10 to 14, the Yoruba use addition. Their phrase for 11, for example, is Ukan La, which is 10 plus 1 equal 11. The other numbers mean 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3, and 10 plus 4. However, for 15, they say Idugun, which derives from Arun, Din, Ogun, or 20 minus 5 equals 15. The other numbers from 16 to 19 are 20 minus 4, 20 minus 3, 20 minus 2, and 20 minus 1. Between 20 and 30, there is a similar pattern. Addition is used from 21 to 24, and subtraction is used from 25 to 29. For example, 22 becomes 20 plus 2, and 26 becomes 30 minus 4. So, not to go any further into this book, um, yeah, it talks about the mathematics used by the durable people, and then in chapter 2 it goes into the astronomy of physics. So the astronomy amongst Dogon. So there's been an argument about the Dogon people and how they were able to go about dealing with astronomy, etc., etc. There's been this big old debate and argument about that. But let's see what he's saying in this book, Robin Walker. He said the Dogon are a non-Islamic people in modern Mali. Their knowledge has created quite a stir since the early 19th century. They traditionally taught their innates about the rings of Saturn, 4 of the 9 moons of Jupiter, the spiral structure of the Milky Way galaxy, and the desolated surface of the moon. So it says the Dogon knowledge was revealed to the world through the writings of a French initiated into the Dogon system, Marcel Golay, who wrote up the information in a book called The Pale Fox. Now, it was said to be that the book is not necessarily accurate, or there's some type of inaccuracy in the book. But let's go ahead and continue. So it says that how far back do Dogon calculation go? The Dogon have a tradition of choosing a new priest every 60 years at the Sigulu festival. This is where the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn synchronize based on the number of changes of priests and other cultural data. Most writers date the Dogon knowledge to the early 1200s AD. Thus, the Dogon were a part of the histories of the medieval Mali and Songhai empires. However, linguists point out that the Dogon language and thus the Dogon culture is very ancient indeed. Mm. So it says the Dogon evolved a 354-day lunar calendar, a 365-day solar calendar, and a series calendar, which implies but does not prove a 365.25-day calendar and a Venusian agricultural calendar based on the observing the sixth position or phases of the planet Venus. So it talks about the Dogon has sophisticated ideas based on the star constellation called Sirius B. Sirius B is a star that orbits Sirius. The unaided eye is an invisible. The Dogon elders maintain that it is the smallest and densest type of star in our galaxy, an idea confirmed by modern astronomy. The Dogon say that Sirius B orbits Sirius every 50 years, almost confirmed by modern astronomy. Controversially, the Dogon say that Sirius B rotates on its own axis each year. They celebrate this at the Bado celebration. They also say that another companion star, Sirius C, is 4 times larger than Sirius B. Modern astronomers cannot confirm or deny these propositions, and so the jury is still out. Whichever be the case, Professor Finch says it is the Dogon who deserve credit for having discovered Sirius B, while the white dwarf as a category of star. So again, that is very controversial. So it talks about the astronomy at Timbuktu. Okay. So I won't go any further into that, but check this book out. And then check out the Blacks in Science, Volume 3, African American Contribution to Science and Technology. All right, so this is in the modern sense, but yeah, it goes into the modern time period. But all the other two goes into the ancient time. All right. Just so yeah, those are the books that I recommend. Um, there's a lot more books, so it's a long list of books that I have, and I ain't gonna be able to go through all of them because I'm just going to like minimize the time. But this deals with the concept of spirituality and science, right? So The DMT is spirit molecule. A doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near death and mystical experiences by Rick Strassman, right? All right, so it talks about the building blocks, the psychedelic drugs, science and society, what DMT is, the pineal, meet the spiritual gland, the psychedelic pineal, etc. So I'm gonna kind of skip through this book, but that's one book that you guys can check out for yourselves. And then this is the book that I was telling you guys about. Some of these books that I have used in my previous videos, and some of them I didn't. This one's called the Iboga, the Root of All Healing. Okay, this is by Daniel Brett. The Iboga. So the Iboga plant can be found in Central West Africa, right, in the Congo area. So amongst those in the tribes in the Congo, they use the Iboga plant as a way to bring about healing. And so some people go and travel to the Congo to use the plant to fight off their drug addiction, and which is the opioid addiction. Okay. All right, so it says Iboga, the sacred wood, right? And the tribe is the Bwiti tribe. All right, so it says the word Iboga comes from the Sago verb Bogoga, meaning to care for, refers to the plant that contains the ibogaine alkaloid. Chief among these is the Central African rainforest snub, the Tabernate iboga. The Tabernate iboga tree is native to a bioregion of West Central Africa that includes Gabon and a few Congo Basin area. Here it grows on the moist and semi-shade rainforest floor. It produces green leaves, pink and white flowers, and inedible oval-shaped orange fruits. However, it is real to claim fame is the potent psychoactive alkaloids contained in its bitter tasting root bark. All right, so here it goes. The origin tells the true story of the Iboga's relationship with human is lost to antiquity. Archaeological findings indicate Iboga use in the Congo Basin stretches back to at least 2,000 years. Over time, various origin tales have emerged that differ depending on which Buiti set tells the story. One legend speaks of a hunter arriving to find a trapped porcupine gnawing at the root bark of a large snub. He takes the iboga loaded creature home, cooks it, eat it, and the vision begins. After his journey, he claims to understand things with an impossible clarity. The disbelief of his clansmen prompts a return journey to the snub. The root bark was harvested and consumed. His claims were verified, and the plant's worship tradition was born. All right, as recorded by ethnographer James W. Fernandez, another myth speaks of a heaven in which God wonders why he has never seen a black man. Concluding they were too sinful to gain access, he takes pity and decides to help them. God kills a pagani, brings him to heaven, cuts off a finger and toe, and plants these appendage in the forest as iboga seedlings. God informs the Pagimi that anyone who eats iboga will arrive in heaven at the death. He then places the Pagimi's bones in a stream where the Pagimi's wife discovered them. During a fishing trip, a wildcat steals the bones. The wife follows the creature to its lair. Here, she is greeted by a voice instructing her to eat from the bush growing at the cave's mouth. As the plant's effect take hold, her dead husband appears before her. He claims he has returned to spread a powerful new African religion, the chief sacrament being a plant that allows its eaters to meet with departed ancestors. Again, that based on what African tradition? That's based on African mythology and African spirituality. Okay. So you guys can check that book out. All right. So this one is called The Surprising Way Human Brain Models the Universe Within by Melvin A. Felton Jr. And by the way, Melvin A. Felton Jr. is a physicist. All right. So as you can see, he deals with this spiritual component of how to understand about the universe within the individual. Not gonna go any further into this book, but I just want to show y'all this book. All right. So look at that book. You got the African cosmology of the Bantu Congo, the principle of life and living. All right. So this is like the earliest form of science. All right, within the Bantu and the Congo area. So I know there are those of you that have this book. So if not, check this book out for yourself. No need for me to go into the pages. Fear of a Black Universe and Outsider Guide to the Future of Physics. Okay, by Stefan Alexander, who is a physicist himself, and he wrote about the jazz of physics. Okay, which inspired, what brought about his inspiration was John Coltrane. All right. So African Cultural Astronomy, which is written by Jarita Harbrook, Rodney Medupe, and Johnson Urema. Okay. Contemplative Science, where Buddha and neuroscience converging. B. Alice Wallace. The Tao of Physics, a pioneering work, the bestseller that reconciles Eastern philosophy and Western sciences, a brilliant humanistic vision of the universe by Fujov Kopura or Kapura. Okay. And there's actually a documentary called Tao of Physics as well. I thought it was a pretty interesting documentary. Ooh. All right. This one's called The Agnostic Defends God, How Science and Philosophy Support Agnosticism. So this was written by Brian Francis. Okay. So the failure of argument for God, the design of life and the laws of nature, the origin of the universe. Okay. And it goes into failure of argument against God, the problem of suffering, the intraceable religion disagreement, why advanced science and philosophy support humility. And I think this is a great book for many to read. So it's called The Agnostic Defends God, How Science and Philosophy Support Agnosticism. And then you got Carl Sagan. So real fast. Who is Carl Sagan? Let's talk about him real quick. All right, so Carl Sagan, who was born on November the 9th, 1934, and died December 20, 1996, was an American astronomer, planetary scientist, cosmologist, astrophysicist, astrobiologist, author, and science communicator, right? And he was best known, his best known scientific contribution is research on extraterrestrial life, including experimental demonstration of the production of amino acid from basic chemicals by radiation. Sagan assembled the first physical message sent into space, the Pioneer Plaque and the Voyager Golden Record, right? Universal messages that could potentially be understood by any extraterrestrial intelligence that might find them. All right. So that's Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan studied a lot into spirituality as well. As a matter of fact, I think it was David Bohm. Let's see, David Bohm. So this is David Bohm, right? David Bohm was an American, Brazilian, British scientist who has described as one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century who contributed unorthodox ideas to quantum theory, neuropsychology, and the philosophy of mind. Okay. It says Bohm advanced the view that quantum physics meant that the old Cartesian model of reality that there are two kinds of substance, the mental and the physical, that somehow interact was too limited. To complement it, he developed a mathematical and physical theory of implicated and explicated order. He also believed that the brain at the cellular level works according to the mathematics of some quantum effects and postulate that thought is distributed and non-localized just as quantum entities are. But not to get too much into his life, he studied with people such as Jiddu Krishnamurti. And Jiddu Krishnamurti was an Indian philosopher and he was a spiritualist, right? That did a lot of lecture on spirituality, meditation, and how to bring about the study of the mind, etc. So him and Jiddu Krishnamurti had plenty interviews with each other, and they have worked alongside with each other as well. Okay. All right. So the name of this book is called Cosmos by Carl Sagan. All right. It's a classic book. As you can see, there's a foreword by Neil deGrasse Tyson, introduction by Anne Drulin. So you guys can look into this book as well. The Big Picture on the Origin of Life, Meaning of the Universe Itself by Sean Carroll. Okay. And then you got Carl Sagan and Drulin, The Shadow of Forgotten Ancestors. Let's see what this is about. So let's look at this real quick. As you can see, a carving from the Sepik River, Central Highlands of Papua New Guinea. All right, so let's check out chapter 1, On Earth as It Is in Heaven. Let's look at that. This one is On Earth as It Is in Heaven. So how long the star has been fading, lamplight dimming. Nassim 748, 834 in China. So it says, for the forming of the earth, they say earth, it arose suddenly just like a cloud, like a mist, now forming, unfolding. Okay, the Maimon book of the dawn of life. All right, so it goes off saying nothing lives forever in heaven as it is on earth. Even the stars grow old, decay, and die. They die and they are born. There was once a time before the sun and earth exists, a time before there was day or night, long, long before there was anyone to record the beginning for those who might come after. Nevertheless, imagine you were a witness to that time. An immense mass of gas and dust is swiftly collapsing under its own weight, spinning ever faster, transforming itself from a turbulent, chaotic cloud into what seemed to be a distinct, orderly, thin disk. It is its exact center smolder a dull cherry red. Watch from on high above the disk for 100 million years, and you will see the central mass grow whiter and more brilliant until, after a couple of abortive and incomplete attempts, it bursts into radiance and sustains thermonuclear fire. The sun is born. Faithfully, it will shine over the next 5 billion years, when the matter in the disk will have evolved into beings able to reconstruct the circumstances of its origin and theirs. All right, so only the inmost provenance of the disk are illuminated. Further out, the sunlight fails to penetrate. You plunge into the recesses of the cloud to see what wonders are unfolding. You discover a million small worlds mouthing about the great central fire. A few thousand sizable ones here and there, most circling near the sun, but some at great distance away, are destined to find each other, merge, and become Earth. This spinning disk out of which worlds are forming has fallen together from the sparse matter that punctuates a vast region of interstellar vacuum within the Milky Way galaxy. The atoms and grains that makes it up are the bosom and josm of galactic evolution. Here, an oxygen atom generate from helium in the interior inferior of some long dead red giant star. There, a carbon atom is expelled from the atmosphere of which a carbon rich star in some quite different galactic sector, and how now an iron atom free for world making by a mighty supernova exposition in the still more ancient past. 5 billion years after the events we are describing, these very atoms may be coursing through your bloodstream. So our story begins here in the dark, pullulating, dimly illuminating this, the story as it actually turned out, in a numerous number of other stories that would have come to things had things gone just a little differently, the stories of our world and species, but also the story of many other worlds and life forms destined never to be. The disc rippling with possible features or futures. All right, so basically, to sum that up, the whole point is we all, our ancestors, right, as far as the organism is concerned, whether it be animals, plants, reptiles, humans, etc. Our ancestors will be those what you call celestial objects, right? Which is the star, the sun, the planets, the elements on the periodic tables, right? That's where we come from. Those are our predecessors. Those came before us, okay? So it is partially true when people say we are of the cosmos, right? That's partially true. Reason why I say that's partially true, because those are our predecessors. Those things came and exist before we was brought into existence as humans or as organisms. All right. So just like when we die and we reproduce, the stars go through its process of dying and reproduce as well. You know what I'm saying? The sun, which basically the star is nothing more than the sun itself, technically speaking, right? So these things come before us. Bacteria came before us, right? So we are made of bacteria. Bacteria are an organism, okay? Cells are organism, all of that. So these are our predecessors. So when we deal with understanding about the cosmos, when we dealing with the stars and the moons and stuff like that, we got to understand that those are our predecessors. Those are our ancestors. They was already here before we even was thought of. All right. So we came out of existence of those things. That radiation that we have, if it wasn't for the sun, we would not be here. Because the sun is the reason why you're able to survive. Meaning that you get your thermal energy, right? So when that sun hits the plants, that's how plants survive, because plants rely on photosynthesis. And the photosynthesis comes from the sun, right? Which is light energy. So the plant don't get its photosynthesis, then the rest of us, we won't have any survive. We won't be surviving at all. We won't be able to live, because we got to rely on plants for our nutrition, for our resources, etc. We got to rely on animals for those of us that eat animals, for our resources, for our nutrition, for our proteins, and all of that. So if the animal cannot feed all the plants, and the plants can't get its resources from the sun and from the rain, then we won't be here. So those things are our predecessors. All right. And the next book is called The Philosophy, Science, and Religion for Everyone. So I won't go into that book. Spiritual Science, Why Science Needs Spirituality to Make Sense of the World by Steve Taylor. All right, so it says Origin of Materialism when Science Turns into a Belief System. Uh-oh, this is a good one. So it says materialist belief system is so pervasive and taken for granted that we may not even be aware that it exists. In the same way that for the peasants of medieval Europe, say the belief system of Christianity was so deeply embedded into their lives that they accept it as reality, unaware of any alternative perspective. All right, so it goes down here to talk about, and according to materialism, this primary thing is matter. There are no higher levels of reality, no different dimension, no heaven or hell or gods or spirit. Human beings do not have soul or spirit, and even our minds are material in the sense that they're just a product of our brains. Even the various forms of energy, such as mechanical, thermal, and kinetic energy, are material in the sense that they are properties of material objects. So, in the same way that color is a property of objects, only the physical is real. The physical stuff of the world around us and the physical stuff of our bodies. An obvious alternative to monism is dualism, the belief that the world is made up of two fundamental things. One of these is matter, and the other is a non-material quality, such as mind or perhaps soul or consciousness. According to dualists, mind or soul can be accounted for in terms of matter. They are of a fundamentally different nature. But to materialists, there is nothing mysterious about the mind or about life itself or even death. All can be explained in terms of interaction of material elements such as brain cells, molecules, and atoms. So materialism suggests that matter is the primary of or fundamental substance in the world, and that all phenomena, including mental phenomena, can be explained in terms of the interaction of matters. The basic reality of the world is microcosmic particles, which collect together and interact in extremely complex ways to produce everything we know. We living beings are simply agglomeration of particles. We are machine-like entities made of a tiny material building blocks consisting of different types of atoms and molecules working together to form different parts of our bodies and organize the interaction between them. Seen in this way, you could refer to materialism as bottom-up approach. That is, it tries to explain all human behavior and experiences in terms of biology, chemistry, and physics. Mm. So these ideas might be said to the primary assumption of materialism, but other assumptions follow from them. Every religion has a number of basic tenets, principles that everyone who takes up the religion has to adopt. And here are what might be called the 10 tenets of materialism. So, as you can see, it goes into it. It talks about the life came into existence or life came into being by accident through the interaction of certain chemicals. Human beings are purely physical creatures or machine. There is nothing more to us than physical stuff, that is, the atom, molecules, and cells of our bodies and brains. Living beings consist of selfish genes whose goal is to replicate themselves. All mental phenomena can be explained in terms of neurological activity. Consciousness itself is generated by the brain. Because consciousness is produced by the brain and we are nothing more than physical stuff, there can be any life after death. When my brain and body cease to function, my consciousness and identity will disappear, just as the picture on a television screen disappears when the plug is out. Human behavior can be explained in genetic terms. Present-day human traits and characteristics exist because they had survival values of our ancestors. As living beings, we are isolated individuals moving through space in separation to another. The world exists out there separate from human beings. It is independent of us. It would exist in the same form even if we were here to be aware of it. Our normal state of awareness is fairly objective and reliable and show us the world as it is. Paranormal or psi phenomena cannot be genuine because they contravene the fundamental laws of nature. For example, there is no known energy field which could link one mind to another and make telepathy possible, and no known force which could account for the ability to move objects by mental effort. All right, so the cultural roots of materialism, I won't go into that, but just to show you that this book is it's a pretty decent book. It seems like it. So I would recommend people to have this book. It's called The Spiritual Science: Why Science Needs Spirituality to Make Sense of the World by Steve Taylor. All right, so Pluto. Pluto is New Horizon for a Lost Horizon. Astronomy, astrology, and mythology. Okay, so as you can see, there's many artists here, but it was edited by Richard Grosvenor. All right. And so with that being said, that's all I have for today. So pretty much the whole argument is that you would not have modern science if there was no concept of cultural interpretation or cultural practices and spiritual practices. Okay, so to answer the question after doing this 2-hour and 19-minute video, right? Science does come out of the school of spirituality, and what they both have in common is that they both come out of the school of philosophy. Okay, so science does come out of the school of spirituality, right, which is out of culturalism, right? And it comes out of philosophy. So philosophy introduces both spirituality and science. But spirituality came before the concept of science, or what we know today is modern science. All right, so thank you guys for tuning in and watching, for those of you that are watching. And I appreciate for you guys that are in the comment sections. Shout out to Brother Vinyasa. Shout out to Simon. With that being said, y'all have a good one. Y'all be safe out here. So peace and power, elevation be to all of you. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, like my channel, share my channel, etc. If you just coming in, watch this video, you got to watch it from the beginning. Now, you don't have to watch it all the way through. You can watch it parts by parts, however you want to watch it. You know what I'm saying? So I know you don't really have the time to watch all of it, but yeah. But until then, y'all take it easy on yourself, and I'll reconnect with you guys later. So until next time, peace. Have a good one. Deuces.